Hey everyone, welcome to another typology interview. We have two special guests. We have alpha males from two different locations here. I'm ready to duke it out. Just joking. Just maybe I'll put in like fight 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
That's what my audience wants to see.
So I don't think you guys need introductions. We have Dave Powers from Tribe Objective Personality and host Eric from Tribe Talking with Famous People, and we're ready to go. How's it going, guys?
It's going great. I'm not sure what we're debating. What do we want to talk
I don't
about?
even know. I don't think we're debating anything. We're just like hanging out.
Yeah, great.
How's it going, Eric? You going good?
Yeah, it's going good. And I'll tell you that in the time between when we scheduled this and today when it happened, I've had a lot of people express a lot of enthusiasm for seeing this upcoming video.
Oh, really? So. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
Cool.
That's great.
Yeah. So you guys are both like pretty into typology. I interviewed both of you separately, so I don't think we really need to get into that too much. But I was just wondering, maybe we can talk about currently what's like the Myers-Briggs system and what you guys think about Myers-Briggs and what needs to happen with it, or is it okay? Can we just keep it? So maybe let's start with host Eric. Let's see what's going on. What's your opinion on Myers-Briggs?
Well, I think the straightforward Myers-Briggs approach is adequate if you're only using typology for a work thing. Now, the tests still aren't adequate in terms of actually identifying what type they are, but I think the idea that I don't need to pay attention to the backslot functions, and I can type introverts as by their second function, like so, that ISFJs have FE second function, so they call them ISFJs because they say they're displaying their second function in the work environment. So if you're just trying to talk about MBTI as defining displays of how people are going to engage in a work environment, then I think it's inadequate, but not fundamentally flawed in any sense.
Okay.
But if you're talking about it any other way, then it's not good.
Not good. Like, okay, go into that a little more. Yeah.
Well, if you're using it to say, like, this is your type as a person, then it's not going to work very well because it's designed to get a survey of your displays. And if your survey of displays may be consistent with ISFJ, but that's not actually going to be necessarily your type if they're only surveying displays. It might be how you play out at work environment, in which case if it serves its teleological purpose, then presumably it's good enough for whoever bought the service and whoever provides the service. Everyone's satisfied. The clients are all satisfied, then fine. But beyond that, I wouldn't say it provides us any meaningful information about the human experience that we can actually use to correctly understand ourselves and others via cognitive functions.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what Eric's saying there is basically the common complaint that science has been having against Myers-Briggs for decades now. That right. It's kind of our opinion in general from this community that there's some value there. There's some kind of patterns of psychology being tracked that's been pulled from Carl Jung and then kind of put together by Myers and Briggs. But like the Myers-Briggs / CPP company, like CPP, like some kind of business parent company bought the rights to Myers and Briggs in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, somewhere in there. I forget exactly where.
30 years, somewhere in there.
Yes.
Yeah, such a short period of time, 30 years.
Yeah, I think it might have been more towards 70s or 80s. But anyways, So like the company now owns it, and so it's their job to make it profitable to some degree. Right. So the point is, like, that's fine, that's great. And like from what I can see and understand, there is a lot of value to it in kind of a corporate setting. I know that, businesses will buy a Myers-Briggs type thing for their people at the end of the year or whatever. And so there's a lot of different value for it here and there, especially in group settings or personality or teams. But they've also therefore don't really have a strong reason to go towards science because it's run by a company that is there to kind of keep it for the public and keep it more as a product or service for the community, in a business setting. So like there's not any updating of it. There's not any scientific testing. They constantly get their butts kicked because when science comes in and says, hey, they're claiming to have some kind of personality, psychology, science here. Where are your claims? Where are you getting this data from? And then they just get all backpedaly and then, it gets quiet again. So That unfortunately is kind of where it's been kind of stuck, which I think has forced a void where you get all these weirdos on the internet, ourselves included.
Yeah.
Exactly. That are like, hey, there is some science here, or we're seeing different things. We want to, as a community, kind of bring this up and go, is there something here or not? You know, so that's.
I think what you're kind of indicating as well is that MBTI is saying the ideational part of this, the figuring out the actual direct mechanics of things, is done. We've done all that work, and now we can simply use the work we completed as a tool.
Yeah.
So we're saying, okay, well, but the tool you're using is like a prototype. It's not really ready for action, and we need to debug it first, you know?
Right. Which is normally what happens in some type of a scientific community to some degree, where there's some type of, you know, like every year, every couple of years, there's kind of an updated model, you know? There's a revision, you know, the DSM-4 or the DSM-5 or whatever.
Oh, for the
and Myers-Briggs, it's still the same old, you know, J's and P's and NF and ST and all this stuff, like, or, you know, SP, all the old kind of dated terms that are not quite as relevant as they are today, you know?
Interesting. Do you have something to add to that, Eric, at all?
No, go ahead and take us where you're going next.
All right, the conductor's going. I'm wondering, like, is there a need for a different system? Do you guys think that like, or Myers-Briggs is enough? Like,
yeah, there's a need, of course, because ideally we'd understand in full what cognitive functions has to teach us about the mechanics of human consciousness. And now remember, the mechanics of human consciousness, there may be an empirical link which has to do with suppression. That is to say, when some parts of the brain light up, other parts of the brain dim down. But regardless of that empirical link, the mechanics of it have to represent how interactions between people actually play out as processes in ways that it can offer predictions that can then either be verified or falsified through something other than just itself.
Right. Yeah, right on. I think too, as well, it's like there's a kind of a relative spectrum of like valuable or useful to who, like whether it's a self-growth kind of person, somebody in just a corporate environment where it's kind of a fun gimmick, so it's something they do for a couple of days, or somebody who's much more in trying to solve some serious life problems, or like in a corporate setting or even a government setting where you have kind of a third party thing going on where, like, say the bosses want to know, who am I hiring here? And so the person may not even know that they're being typed or that their type matters, but the people that are hiring or firing does. And so now it needs to get a little bit more
exact, that's dangerous, you know? Too, like if you get mistyped and stuff.
So it can be anywhere from like kind of a fun horoscope to kind of in the middle of self-growth, and then an all-out weapon on the other side, on the other extreme.
I think it's useful to think of it in terms of continents drifting apart. So at the turn of the 20th century, scientists had figured out that, based on the shapes and everything, that the continents were seeming to be moving apart from each other. And the prevailing theory as to why this was occurring was that the Earth was gradually expanding like a balloon. And just as dots on a balloon will move further apart from each other, so too will the continents. And then a German guy came up with the idea of plate tectonics and presented it in like 1931 at a conference. The whole conference like booed his ass, like, boo, you crazy motherfucker, no. The point is, though, that there was one correct explanation for why the continents move around. And they did eventually come up with a way to falsify plate tectonics. Namely, they looked at earthquake fault lines and saw if they consistently, if they go up some places and down some places, then the expanding thing isn't making any sense, right?
Yeah.
So they actually did the empirics on it and determined, yes, this is a solid falsification of the expanding Earth notion and a verification of plate tectonics, or at least consistent with plate tectonics. So my point is, to the extent that there is disagreement, I like to think of it like expanding continents, that one party and one explanation is correct and the others are incorrect.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I remember like going through the pseudoscience list on Wikipedia, like kind of studying Myers-Briggs and versus science and pseudoscience. And I remember seeing something like that, but I think it was actually plate tectonics that was kind of in the pseudoscience bin for a while before it was actually verified as a real, like, wait, this is actually the answer, you know? And it does feel like with the Myers-Briggs and the Jungian functions and stuff, it does feel like there is some truth there, but now the burden is on us as the community to take it to, okay, is this actually worth building true psychological sound theories on that can be tested scientifically like that, you know?
But the other point is that the empirics always follow the intuition. So the guy had the notion right. He had it all figured out before he had any evidence at all, because he had intuited correctly what the mechanics were.
Yeah, you got the hypothesis first, and then going and testing it. Yeah.
So I'm coming from a physics background, and it's just like the pattern in physics, and it probably will continue, is that like we're never right. We just keep refining and getting closer and closer to being right. But like Newton,
I disagree with that. Because look, what actually happens is things get blocked off. So relativity is correct within its block.
Right.
Newtonian physics is correct within its block,
within its scale.
And those things don't necessarily need to be continually updated. They become finalized as this is our understanding of this, and things that differ from that or deviate from that or contradict that are seen as in other blocks, and thus there's no trouble there.
Right, but like I'll just bring a metaphor of like a molecule, for example. So a molecule is something that's not actually existing. There's no such thing as a molecule. It's like, okay, then you get to atoms. Well, atoms actually don't exist. There's subatomic particles. And like there's always something that explains it further in a deeper level. So like
but there's not. They end it, but there's not. There's particles. It doesn't get smaller than particles. You've got your particles, but then that's it. That is the firm limit. It doesn't go down any further.
For now.
No, not for now. No, not for now. Within the block, it's been rendered as this is definitive. This is the smallest limit within that block, and that it's a quantum limit. It's an absolute quantum limit. So it's not the case that it's infinitesimally regressible in either direction. I mean, infinitely regressible in either direction.
Okay.
No, I see what you're saying, Benjamin. Like that's kind of our understanding now. Like it seems like a lot of the say with the personality stuff, it's like we can start off with a theory, and then from there we got to beat the heck out of it to see kind of what it refines, and then improve our understanding over time.
So I also wanted to know what you guys each consider as success of a system. Like, what's a system success?
That's a good question. Yeah,
I let Eric start last time, so go ahead, Dave.
I'm trying to work backwards based upon what does science want, and so I'm trying to really look at like what science wants from looking back at all of the ass kicking that Myers and Briggs has gotten over the decades. Like, what are the critics demanding that they produce? And I really found that like they're not asking for a whole lot. They're not asking for like, look, this has got to be tested, this, and this. They're asking for a kind of a scale of like, can you produce some type of measurability, test, retest, objectivity to some degree that can warrant that we then take it to the next level and then continue the process up. Mm-hmm. So like from our angle, we've really struggled with where could we find some type of objective setting that doesn't involve, say the Dario Nardi approach where he's got electrodes and, mapping the brain and stuff, which is really good.
That's definitely
that's really, really good. What if you don't have access to that and you still want to be in on the game? So we were looking for something a little bit more fast and dirty, so that's where we came up with like the test, retest, and or, typing people in separate rooms and comparing our results, where there's some type of a double blind objectivity to some degree. So there's trackability on the numbers. We're like, hey, these two people are getting the same type 90% of the time or whatever. That was a big thing, which then justified or kind of takes it to the next level of like, therefore, if you can actually do that, now what else can we do? What we're ultimately looking for is like the predictability of the person, like not only with their life choices, problems, even down to where they dress and all that kind of detail, but then also the solution. So if we figure out somebody who's the same type as you, and we have 50 of these guys on file, and they all have the same exact problems, and then a few of them have figured out solutions. If we take that solution and hand you the same solution with the same problem as the same type, can you now get a result? So that's kind of like a self-growth.
That's a really nice goal. Yeah, for sure. What about you, Eric?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think about being a system success, I guess? That was the question.
Sorry. Okay. So let's say we were drawing a map. The thing we'd be drawing a map of would be a topography, a stretch of land. Let's say we were drawing a map of Los Angeles, okay? So the thing that needs to be addressed first is, if we're making a map right now, what is the thing that's the topography? And the answer is it's a dynamic system. So we're modeling a dynamic system. And the way to model a dynamic system is to reduce it to agents, vectors, objects, and fields, in a way that can actually be coded into a simulation of a dynamic system. So we have to make sure then that any system, if it wants to be correct about cognitive functions, that it operationalizes its terms. In other words, it has a mechanism by which terms get converted into other terms that a computer could deal with. It doesn't require any standard, it requires only rules. If you have a standard, that requires discretion. So the thing is, a model needs to provide you a discretion-free mechanics. Now, that's an explanation of what's going on. That's different from actually using your understanding of that explanation of what's going on to type people. That's a process of engaging with people for a specific purpose. Whereas the model itself is designed to withstand scrutiny. Those models which withstand the most scrutiny, in other words, in which have the steepest rhetorical slope to argue against them, that they do the job the best in terms of making it very difficult for anybody to point out contradictions or what's wrong with it or anything like that. And then there's also ways in which it can link back to a bunch of other validation criteria that are iffy, but combined can provide you a sense of whether or not this thing validates. Regardless, I made a video on this actually last night or 2 nights ago or something called like, how do you know which system is best? So if anybody wants further information on that, my thoughts on it, you can watch that video. I go over it in great detail.
Right. Can I just ask a follow-up question? How do you think plugging that information into a computer would prove the validity of the system?
Because I'm going back to the first question. What are we drawing a map of? And the answer is a dynamic system. How do we map dynamic systems? We make simulations of their mechanics. That's the standard way. I mean, okay, granted, it's not the only way to map a dynamic system. You could map it mathematically in the sense of saying it follows this kind of distribution curve or something like that, right?
Yeah, partial.
But then that's not mapping it. That's describing it. You're mapping the mechanics of it. You're understanding all the way that functions interact with variables, interact with units, etc. Right? So and how those vectors move in the system. So for example, if I say extroverted intuition is a put function, what I mean there is extroverted intuition is a way of attending such that data goes this way. If I say introverted thinking is a get function, I'm saying extroverted thinking is a vector in which you're attending such that data goes this way. And if I say, it's a receive function, you're attending such that data already existent is being attended to. So those things are things you can actually say, we know agents interact like this and information works with agents like this, so we can actually model it.
Right. Okay, I'm just going to push a little bit further. So you can model Super Mario Brothers. It doesn't mean it's real. So like, how do you resolve that?
Because everybody's modeling Super Mario Brothers in this analogy. The question is, who is modeling the mechanics of the game correctly? So in other words, in that instance, it would be easy because we have a very finite set of data to model. It's not a dynamic system; it's a static system.
Right. So then, how do you know that it's correct?
Well, that would be easy to see. If I say the model of the system is, in that instance, like it would be, okay, information goes like this. If I push the joystick this way, it goes this way. And so you can test that empirically directly because it's a finite system and everything's in front of you. You don't have to guess about anything. You don't have to look under any covers or guess what the shape is. It's already under a cover.
Right. But
so that's easy.
Normally in science, you test something against reality. So like, how would you, like that part is sort of missing from your explanation. I'm just wondering how you.
Okay. So, well, the test against realities are multiple. So first of all, remember that fundamentally what this map is a way of definitionally relating terms to each other so that they constrain each other definitionally. So in other words, the reason why I can't be any FE is that I need to, in order to be an any DOM means to put information. The only way I can put information successfully in an action format is if I have a cooperative deliberative function as a tool function, because it's like I can either think it all out and then take a long action, or I can deal with dynamic systems, which means I have to think a little bit out or know something about it, see what the data is, adjust, see. I can't do both those things in coordination because they need each other in order to provide the attentional package that's required to interface with it. It's necessarily the case that definitionally, if I have a tool function of TI, that my polar is going to be FI. That means my blind spot is FI. The reason is if I use as a default mechanism of dealing with every problem a disinterested calculus, which is TI, then I am blind to an interested calculus, definitionally, necessarily, relationally. So when we have those things down, then we have a system that could be right. If it doesn't do that, it can't be right. It's not even a model of a dynamic system. It's just arbitrary assertions that these displays represent mechanics without any way of determining that.
Mm. Do you have something on that, Dave, a little bit?
I would just be interested in like how you could test or verify if you're on the right path or not. I mean, the mechanics, as far as I can understand it, make a lot of sense. Like the way he's kind of got the theory figured out.
Yeah.
In just kind of a mechanical kind of way.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the mechanics are?
From what we're doing, like I'm finding that like every year or every few months, I'm getting kind of a whole new kind of look on how I think the mechanics are. I am seeing there's a lot of like binary coin stuff, like kind of what you're saying makes a lot of sense as well. We're kind of working backwards from like playing our typing game where we're typing people separately and then we're logging them in a Google Doc or whatever. And then from that database, from that, pile of all these people that are typed the same type or whatever, from there, we're kind of pulling out a lot of interesting patterns that we're then going back and trying to make sense of those. So we're kind of
but it's circular. It assumes its own understanding of the mechanics is correct.
I know. Yeah. And the choke point on our whole deal here is getting the same type number as each other. That's like our dividing line, whether this, goes to the next level or not, is the fact that how are Shani and I looking at people, like say out of 100 people we're looking at, and 80-90% of the time we can get the same type number out of 512 or damn close to it. That statistically says the rules of outside science of like, okay, you're tracking something here. From that, we don't even know what. And then
let me type you right now. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Do you and Shannon sometimes have disagreements about things?
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of you don't have to tell me the specifics of the fight, but give me the specifics of the moment in which you had this fight, where you had a disagreement with Shannon in the last few weeks. Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
For example, 2 weeks ago, I came home from the grocery store and I had the wrong kind of non-dairy creamer.
Yeah.
Shannon got mad. Okay, can you give me one of those?
Yeah, we've got stuff like that, or like in the morning times, it's very stressful getting the kid to school, so we'll have like arguments or disagreements on the timing of how we.
Can you give me a specific example?
Let's say we've had an argument over how we get Cody to the bus.
When
did we have this argument?
Yeah.
This argument was probably a couple of years ago. It's one that I can remember.
Okay, you are an ENTJ.
Okay.
You are unable to do SI.
Sure.
It's your blind spot.
Okay.
That means your tool function is NI, which makes sense as to why you're approaching cognitive functions and this whole thing like this. You approach everything as a problem that can reduce down to a singular thing that you can rely on and then move forward with your TE as a how-to thing. You are an ENTJ.
Absolutely. Defining the terms as such, if you define the terms, maybe to your types or the Myers-Briggs type.
Okay, then you explain why you can't answer that question. Why can't you give me specific examples from the past?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Why can't I give you specific?
I have a really good explanation for why. You don't have any explanation for why.
Let him answer, Eric. Yeah, that's a good question.
I will let you answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I definitely have a hard time getting specific examples from the past of a good example of when Shani and I have fought lately. Yes.
Why though?
I couldn't even tell you why right now.
So let's go with my explanation then.
Okay.
Well,
it's because you have polar SI.
Okay, sure. That's a theory.
A little bit too. I want to quote Kimberly Joy. Kimberly Joy said, your type of double-blind testing only proves that you're both in the same delusion.
Yeah, right. So that's definitely something that I really looked at and thought about, especially when we first started off doing this. And like the thing is, like scientifically, as far as I know, if you take this to scientific groups and be like, hey, we're tracking something out of 512 and hitting the same thing, it gets really hard. Like, for example, let me back up. If you have a personality type when there's only two types, and you get a 0 if they have glasses and a 1 if they don't have glasses. And so you go to type people and you're getting the same number because you're just putting a 0 or a 1, looking at the person going whether they have glasses or not. it gets pretty easy to just have some made up subjective theory where the bar is low enough that any person can kind of follow and play the game and win and get the same type.
Right.
When you're getting on a spectrum of 512, it's like, yes, Shandy and I absolutely have the same delusions, and we'll see this quite a bit. We'll see where like we'll get people that will test and retest, and they'll be off again. Is that we'll both be like, oh, that reminds me of Dave's brother. That guy reminds me of Dave's brother. Oh, also reminds Shandy of Dave's brother. And then we'll get it wrong, and like how we'll know that is like we'll go back and type them a year later and be like, wait a minute, what were we thinking? You know, but the
can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
Maybe what's happening, and this would be not a bad thing for you to be doing at all, but maybe what's happening is that 16 personality types, you can take all of their total amount of displays, and you can adequately and reasonably and naturally taxonomy them into 512 kinds of displays.
Yeah.
Now, in that instance, you might be taxonomying something real here, and you might actually, your data might be meaningful in a descriptive sense of the population, but it's not an assessment of cognitive functions or of type, but rather of subtypes of displays that are typical for given types. And so I think the only real conflict we have here is that you're more interested in it from a display angle than, and I'm more interested in it from a mechanical angle. If you find it useful to have knowledge about which of those 512 displays you make, then that's a perfectly reasonable thing to find useful, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. So the last sort of thing I wanted to touch on before we like stray off into, I don't know, some fantasy land, I want to know what you guys think maybe the future steps of typology is. Do you think like we got to the answer at the moment, or do you think there's a lot still more to develop? Maybe start again with Eric, because Dave just answered.
Yes, we got to the answer. It's my explanation. No, there's not much more to develop, although it's not all fleshed out. Nobody's really helping me with it, although I wish that would be the case. But they are helping me with it by constantly attacking me, which is the best thing that can happen to anybody with their model, is to have it constantly attacked and have to defend it constantly and make sure it's watertight.
Right.
It's very difficult to find any holes in my model anymore. It's hard to attack it. It's a steep rhetorical slope to argue against it. So that's until there's a model that defeats that, in other words, it can win argumentationally against mine has primacy.
Okay, I'm going to push back before I let Dave answer. So what happens if you make a model that's so complex that nobody is able to understand it enough to be able to attack it? Or
mine's not complex.
No, okay. Or what about like if no one really cares enough to attack it?
I mean, that's not the case. Mine's getting attacked left and right.
Okay, good.
If people try anyway, it's usually straw manning me. They'll say, but what about this thing? And I'll say, I explain it fully here, and I'll link them to a video or whatever. And I have tons of videos explaining the various components of it, why TI is objective, why TE is subjective.
And so then who judges if you've explained it correctly or not?
You can. Everybody can. Everybody can come listen to my explanation and do their very best to find holes in it so that they can attack it and prove me wrong. But the problem is, because it's so well put together, not very many people anymore can find anything wrong with it, because I adjust every time they do. And I'm adjusting the mechanical architecture of the thing. So it's not like I'm adjusting, well, now this means this. I'm saying, okay, well, okay, that is a hole. So I have to remove that variable, for example, or I have to put that under this set of variables instead because I've misidentified it as it's an independent vector or something like that. I adjust. And the thing is, this is my third attempt at modeling this shit. The first two fell apart because people successfully scrutinized them, critiqued them, and I acknowledged they were bullshit, and I tossed them aside and started again.
Nice. Yeah, okay. And so this one so far has been holding up. So like, do you think there's a future development that will happen from this, or it'll hold up for like another 10,000 years or what? I
mean, I don't know. I would love to see it actually get simulated. I'm currently putting together something where I'm describing everything in terms of operationalized terms. That is to say, expressions that can be rendered into expressions that computers can deal with. Okay. And so I would love to see somebody who was more skilled and knowledge than me actually make that into a computer program, like put it into Python or whatever kind of computer languages that people use for that sort of thing. You know, I don't know how to do any of that.
Right. And then would that predict reality? Like if you put that into a computer method of type, would that predict how they would act in certain situations?
No. Well, what you do is in the sim, you'd watch how the simulated agents behave, and you'd see if in fact with these mechanics, the system reflects something similar to what actual life is. That ISFJs act like we think ISFJs act like. That given these rules and dynamics, that they develop their identity in coordination with our expectations that they will. So that the SI Dom with FE will, be very much influenced by their past experiences, and that will be able to be reflected in the mechanics of the simulation.
Okay. What about you, Dave? What do you think the future of typology is?
I don't know. All I know is what we've got so far is that we are able to do the objective thing
That's a cop-out, man.
Well, I got my hopes of where I want to take it, kind of my guesses and my projections. So, but like starting very simply, it's like just trying to beat the first level according to the critics of Myers-Briggs. Of like, could you get two different people in two different rooms to get some kind of consistency? It doesn't prove anything. Like one of your videos really kind of points out. But it's at least a starting bar of going, okay, there's something objective being tracked here to some degree. Now what? So from there, what we're doing is going, all right, we're going to continue to get our skills up where Shani and I can type a lot of people and get close to the same number or the same number. Then from there, they drop into a database. Then from there, it gets interesting because there's a lot of errors in there. We type people wrong all the time, get these offs here and there. But the database as a whole is very primarily pretty well working. And I can say that based upon, people of the same type have the same hair color, gender preferences, health issues, body type, stuff like that is showing up, even though we're not typing people based on how they look or whatever.
Yeah.
Then from there, what we need to do next to really kind of put the next burden of proof on us is we need to get some people trained that can do the same repeated system that Dave and Shan do, get 2 more people trained and be like, all right, now you type people independently and see if you're getting the same numbers as us. And we can verify by the numbers or not. Right. So that's going to take a few years to do. What I'd like to do long-term is take the data set of we have of like, all these ENFPs with red hair or whatever, and take a real crazy group like that and take it to a company like 23andMe or Ancestry.com and be like, look, we're tracking physical traits all over the place in all of these types. And I see that in your guys' work, you're talking about hair color and body type and how the ears work, like all these different weird facial features. We're seeing the same stuff cluster around all of our types. If we gave you this pile of data, could you find this in the genetic code? That would be the ultimate goal, is to actually find the personality type in the genetics themselves by spitting in a tube.
And what about like work like Dario Nardi's doing? Would that also be something that you think could confirm or deny? With Dario's work, it would be kind of getting a fresh data set. When people walk into his lab, like, how do we really know that's an ENFJ or not? Because it kind of begs the question, goes in a circle of like, that would be the thing. Like, I think if we can get some type of a cleaned up, verified data set to pull from, then from there, you would have another angle to measure personality physically in science, whether it's through the genetic means or through the brain mapping or whatever. But I think we need to start with a fairly clean data set first.
I think what you're saying, Dave, is that you want to make typology like IQ, which is to say absolutely relative. Everybody takes the same IQ test, right? We get a bunch of data about people and the various scores they can get on it. And then we draw correlations between their score on that test and real world things. So look, people who score 140 on the IQ test correlate more highly with better jobs, more blah, blah, whatever other things you want to say it correlates with, right? The thing is, that's a fine enough thing to do. But then it's important to remember that the test score is not reflective of anything except how well you do on the test. And then the reason the test is more valid than, say, my opinion about your intelligence is because it has those correlations to actual world things. But it goes that direction, not the other direction. So it's not like IQ is representing something in the real world. Rather, this non-real world representational thing, IQ, can be used to establish correlates in the real world. And what I'm saying is cognitive functions isn't like that. It shouldn't be treated like that kind of test. Because if you treat it like that kind of test, then it doesn't matter. Then it's not accounting for mechanics at all. IQ tests something where you're not explaining the mechanics of intelligence. You're just seeing how different people display. Whereas if we have a mechanical approach, we're saying, now this can be falsified with Dario Nardi. So if I say, okay, you're an ENTP because you're extroverted intuition first and introverted thinking second. And if Dario Nardi can identify specific lighting patterns that represent those functions, then it would in theory be able to falsify a series of people but they have to walk around with that shit for like a week. It can't just, or at least a day. You can't just see what they're doing while they're in the chair in the testing office, because that's not going to be their natural attention at all. So you have to let them walk around with that thing on their head for a day, and then you get those results, and you see, well, they spent 90% of their day with Christmas tree lighted brain any, and then the rest of mixed in there was a lot of whatever lighting pattern is TI, and so yeah, they probably are in EHP. Okay, and then I typed in the okay, well, Eric was right about this one. If in fact I'm consistently right paired against that falsification with my letter name that I give them, and you're wrong with your designation with your letter name that you give them, then we conclude that my thing was right and your thing was wrong, or vice versa, right? That would be how we'd falsify it.
I'd like to just step in and say something really quick on this. So like what Dario Nardi can track is, okay, so you have your types, you divide your types into 60 and you say, take this group, see if they're all similar. Take this group if you see they're all similar. All that'll say is that you're creating your taxonomy correctly. That like, okay, this group is similar, that group is similar, that group is similar. And if Dave does the same thing and he comes in with his 512 and he's like, okay, take all these people from this group and show us that they're similar, and that also works. It just means the taxonomy of dividing people is correlated to the brain.
No. Because the thing is, we have a clear, concrete, empirical definition of each type. In other words, extroverted intuition, majority of the time lighting up, and introverted thinking, majority of the time lighting up. That means ENTP. That's the official name of that lighting pattern. That's already established, okay? And there's 16 of those. So what I'm saying is, if I forget type names, I'll say, I type this person as SIFE, and Dave can say, I type this person as meow meow, right? And then that person would then go in and get tested with the brain thing. That would be able to falsify that, because the agreed upon names for for cognitive functions are defined by their lighting patterns as defined by Nardi.
As defined by Nardi, yeah. But like, so what are you calibrating it against? Like you say that's an ESFP, Dave says it's something else. The same person, you can say it's two different people, it's two different types. But as long as they're matching all of the other types you stuck in the same doc.
I'm delegating that calibration where it belongs to Nardi.
Okay. But okay. What do you think, Dave?
I think something along those lines is where this is going. Some type of theory, data sets, scientific testing to some degree. So to me, I think it's just a matter of time before, us, Eric, somebody, Dario Nardi, whatever, I think it's moving that direction. And kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think it's from the void of Myers-Briggs not putting the scientific testing here. I think the fact that we're even constantly arguing this stuff on the internet for years, like, why doesn't it go away? Because like we know intuitively, all of us, like there really is something here. So I think somehow, some way, there's going to be some type of data set, whether it's this exercise or this experiment or this way or that way. I think there really is something here. Eventually, we're going to find it.
It's only a matter of time till both Dave and I are standing on the medal podium, me gold, consoling him silver, as the world concludes that the race is over. And
it's a matter of time.
It's a matter of time.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Do you guys have anything to ask each other? Because I know you guys don't really interact too much, but
I might, but I think this is a good spot to end this video.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good, man. This is great.
Right. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming out. It was great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate it too. I know my viewing audience is very excited to see it.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
Have a good one, guys. Bye.